Welcome back to Bazaar. I'm Inko, and I've got some Stelle card reveals for you. These will all be going live with Stelle on the 13th, which is next Wednesday, 4 days from now as the video goes live. I'll be revealing the cards I got, which is sort of a haste package, from what I view as the least interesting and powerful looking at the bunch to the most interesting and powerful of the bunch. So the most bog standard card of the lot, I would say, is the Low Roller. It's a medium vehicle tech. It's a 4-speed item that haste 1-for-1 at silver tier, and it has +1 multicast for each adjacent tool. As always, we don't exactly know how these scale, we don't exactly know what the enchant timing is going to be, but on something like Low Roller, it seems incredibly likely to me that it's going to be getting additional haste duration as you rank it up, and that makes it pretty analogous to a Dock Lines from Vanessa. And while Dock Lines tends to be a really solid card, not particularly broken, but very strong in terms of the raw value it adds to a build, I expect a Low Roller to be in a pretty similar spot, although it's worth noting that at silver tier at least, it is notably worse than a silver Dock Lines, but different characters, different power curves, different concerns with status ailments. Low Roller is looking fine, but not super exciting. There's some way more hype stuff going on in the later card reveals. Let's move on to the next one, which is going to be Jetpack. Jetpack is a small vehicle, 5-second duration, and it hastes the item to the left of it for 1 second, and if it's flying, haste the item to the right of it for 1 second, starting at bronze. And again, with an item like this, I just assume per tier we're going to be seeing additional haste duration, but we don't really know that yet. As for flying, the way that works, other people have reveals much more focused on flying than mine is, although mine mentions it a lot. Flying is pretty heavily integrated into the card pool for Stelle. Flying is a binary toggle. An item is either flying or not. There are items that will start items flying, there are items that will stop items flying, both for themselves and for other items, some by adjacency, some randomly, some by type. So there's going to be a lot of different ways that you could theoretically make the jetpack start flying, is the point of this. Which means that if you can get it to be flying, it is a controlled haste both adjacent items for 1 to 4 seconds, which is a very strong small item to be sure. It does start at 5 seconds, so it's not like the best haste enabler in the game. Typically the most broken haste enablers are going to see are stuff like Metronome Uzi to get a 2-second haste on something important. Jetpack is still solid though. Fair in a way that Uzi Metronome isn't. Definitely looks like a good enough card if you can get it flying, and if you can't get it flying, there will still be builds that would appreciate targeted haste on a specific item, but I feel like this is mostly for flying builds. If you're not enabling the second half, there's probably better things you can do with your board space. Before I move off of Jetpack, I forgot to cover what flying actually does, which is that it gives you a 50% reduction in duration of crowd control effects, of slow and freeze applied to the item. Additionally, though, what I think is going to be the much more important part of an item being flying is when other items care about the fact they're flying. For Jetpack, it effectively doubles the value of Jetpack for it to be flying. There are going to be no shortage of items that are when an item starts flying do X, whether it's scaling or triggering an effect. There are also going to be items that trigger when you stop flying. There are going to be items that interact with flying in a ton of different ways. And while the flying status ailment is nice for crowd control resistance, I expect that generally the more important part of flying is going to be how items interact with the mechanic in general. As a great example of that, our next item is the headset. It's a small tech and apparel. When your item starts flying, haste it for 1 second. And that is obviously very good. Again, I assume the same scaling, which means it's a ton of haste at higher tiers. So obviously in an ideal world, you can start your whole board flying, and this is going to essentially be an energy potion. But I think it goes much more than that once we'll see the whole card pool for Stelle. We're going to start seeing the idea of starting and stopping flying repeatedly, and this might just be indefinite haste for an entire board, maybe just your key cards, but the ability to repeatedly trigger this headset's passive effect by starting and stop flying triggers being used over and over again is something that's really, really interesting. This could potentially do an absolutely unreasonable amount of haste, and whenever I see cards like this, I always personally start worrying that I'm going to have runs where it's like, all right, gotta find specifically headset to make the dream happen. But that's not the case, because even in just my card reveal, we have redundancy. We have the Animometer. It's a medium tool, starts at silver. It's an active item this time around with a 4-second cast time. And when it goes off, it starts an adjacent item flying. This actually is really important because it means it's a controlled effect. Theoretically, it's random which adjacent item it targets, but if you really care about one specific item flying, then you can put this all the way to one side and not haste. We'll get there in a second. You can start the specific only adjacent item as flying 4 seconds guaranteed. Or you can run it in a more random fashion if you just need the fly procs for something else in general. And then when one of your items starts or stops flying, haste it for 1 second. So this does a very similar thing to headset, but it also bakes in the initial fly trigger as well, at least for some of your items. And then on top of that, it triggers again when something stops flying if you can find the triggers for that. So between these two items, you can see a ton of different haste triggers going into any build that's triggering flying a lot. And that means that if you have a payoff for the haste, this is something that's really, really valuable to you. So what sort of payoffs for the haste might Stelle have? We'll have to wait and see if there's anything more on other characters. But right now we can see that if you can start and stop flying a lot, you can get a ton of haste triggers, whether it be out of Animometer or headset. There's also backups with stuff like Jetpack and low roller for haste from elsewhere. And the payoff for haste that I have to reveal is goggles, actually. Throw out everything you know about goggles, that item's dead. This is a different goggles. It is a bronze starting item. It's a small tool and apparel with a 6-second cast, and it shields for 20. When you haste, adjacent items gain 3% crit chance for the fight. And that is not at all what it used to do. What it used to do is when you would haste, it specifically, then the goggles would gain haste. Now, anytime anything gains haste, this gives the crit chance to the adjacent items, which essentially means that if you can build a high haste spam build, you're going to end up with a situation where anything adjacent to goggles pretty quickly hits 100% crit chance at higher tiers. But the point is that even at the base value of 3% crit chance, that's only 31 haste triggers to get to 100%. That is hard to do, but for the base expectation of a small bronze item, that's still a huge amount of crit chance. We can likely see higher crit chance and higher tiers. I'm very confident that goggles essentially says any haste build can 100% crit chance their payoffs pretty quickly. And that is a very, very strong payoff for an archetype. Now, how exactly the haste archetype is going to work, we have no idea. Every card reveal is only 5 out of 100 cards. We're looking at 5% of the pool. So it's very possible that someone else has a card that's like every time you haste, gain 60 damage. We're looking at Vanessa sort of scaling builds, and it's just incredibly simple to give that 100% crit chance. Alternatively, you might be combining multiple different builds where you're hasting the payoff to a start-stop-fly archetype instead. Once we have all the cards, we can better see how goggles fits. Are you just playing haste? Are you playing fly and you're getting a ton of haste and crit in addition to your fly triggers? But you can see that goggles is giving crazy crit scaling if you have good haste scaling, and you can build a ton of haste out of the fly triggers themselves. I'm very interested in using these cards in play. I hope you're looking forward to Stelle, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for your time, and have a good night. Peace.